As Deborah approached, Leonard leaned back in his chair and said loud enough for half the restaurant to hear, "Tell me, do you do more than carry plates?" Polite smile, silent fury. She didn't respond. He pointed lazily toward the grand piano. "How about a little performance? Show us what you've got, unless waiting tables is your peak." His entourage chuckled. Deborah froze, her breath shallow, fingers trembling, not with fear, but choice. She could walk away and let the moment pass, or she could answer without a word. She turned, walked to the piano, sat. For a second, nothing, just her, the keys, and the laughter still echoing from behind her. Then she played. The first notes fell like rain on silence, simple, haunting. Then the tempo shifted, rising, swirling, cascading into something raw, electric, undeniable. Her hands danced with the kind of grace no money could buy. Every fork paused midair. Every conversation died. Even Leonard's smile faded. What she delivered wasn't just music. It was declaration. It was resistance. It was truth. 3 minutes later, when the final note hung in the air like a held breath, the room exploded into applause. Except from Leonard, who now stared in stunned silence, ego shattered by something he couldn't own or mock. Deborah didn't bow. She simply stood, smiled, for herself this time, and returned to her station. But something had changed, not just in the room, not just in Leonard, but in the way the staff looked at her, in the way she now walked, taller, unapologetic. And the next morning, her inbox had a message, subject line, "Full Scholarship, East Carolina Conservatory of Music." Turns out, one of the guests that night was a board trustee. She had heard everything. At home, it began with her mother's old vinyl records and an out-of-tune piano gifted by a kind neighbor. That battered piano became Deborah's refuge. While other kids played in the street, Deborah sat cross-legged in front of the keys, mimicking radio hits and fumbling through classical pieces from worn second-hand books. She didn't have a teacher, just passion, and it showed. Soon she was playing at church, school recitals, and small-town community events. People noticed. They praised her talent. But praise doesn't pay tuition. By 18, the truth had set in. Scholarships hadn't come, and her family needed her. Her dreams of becoming a professional pianist would have to wait. So she packed away her ambitions and stepped into adulthood, with the piano still in her heart. When she moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, Deborah found a job at La Fontaine, a posh restaurant nestled in the city's historic district. The pay was decent, but what really drew her in was the grand piano tucked into the corner of the dining room. She almost never had time to play it, but knowing it was there gave her comfort. Music hadn't left her. It was simply waiting. That night, the restaurant buzzed with the soft murmur of conversations, silverware against china, and faint jazz in the air. Deborah, now 25, glided between tables with practiced grace. Her colleagues admired her discipline. Most diners didn't even see her. But one man did. The door swung open and in walked Leonard Grayson. The name alone turned heads. Billionaire investor, media magnate, known for his brilliance and his ego. Leonard walked like he owned the building, flanked by polished associates who laughed a little too hard at his jokes. Deborah didn't flinch. She had served difficult customers before. But Leonard wasn't just difficult. He was calculated, a predator in designer shoes. He scanned the room, and his gaze settled on her. His lips curled into a smirk. She looked up, then looked at the piano. "Fine," she said softly. "I'll play." The room went still. She walked toward the piano, every step weighted with fear and defiance. The chandelier's warm light bathed the keys in a golden glow. She sat down slowly,
her hands trembling as she placed them on the ivory. Leonard leaned back in his chair, smug again. He thought he'd won. Then Deborah began to play. The first few notes were fragile, hesitant, but something shifted as her fingers moved. Familiar patterns returned, muscle memory awakened, and soon the room melted away. She chose a piece she knew by heart, Clair de Lune. The melody floated through the restaurant like a breath held too long, delicate, aching, beautiful. Her hands glided over the keys, pouring out everything she had locked inside. Sleepless nights, abandoned dreams, her mother's sacrifices, her own quiet resilience. The chatter stopped. Silverware paused midair. Diners turned, transfixed. Even Leonard's smirk faded. He wasn't expecting this. She played like she was alone in the world, yet connected to everyone in it. With every note, Deborah reclaimed something that had been taken from her, her voice, her dignity, her identity. By the time she struck the final chord, the room was completely silent. Then, applause, thunderous, genuine. Some diners stood, others wiped tears. Her coworkers cheered from the back. Leonard clapped too, but slowly, awkwardly, his expression unreadable. Deborah didn't care. She stood from the piano bench, chest rising with the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She looked around, and this time she didn't see customers. She saw witnesses, people who had seen her, and not one of them would ever forget her. Leonard sat quietly now, hands folded, stripped of every ounce of control he thought he had. He had set a trap, but she had turned it into a stage. She looked up, then looked at the piano. "Fine," she said softly. "I'll play." The room went still. She walked toward the piano, every step weighted with fear and defiance. The chandelier's warm light bathed the keys in a golden glow. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling as she placed them on the ivory. Leonard leaned back in his chair, smug again. He thought he'd won. Then Deborah began to play. The first few notes were fragile, hesitant, but something shifted as her fingers moved. Familiar patterns returned, muscle memory awakened, and soon the room melted away. She chose a piece she knew by heart, Clair de Lune. The melody floated through the restaurant like a breath held too long, delicate, aching, beautiful. Her hands glided over the keys, pouring out everything she had locked inside. Sleepless nights, abandoned dreams, her mother's sacrifices, her own quiet resilience. The chatter stopped. Silverware paused midair. Diners turned, transfixed. Even Leonard's smirk faded. He wasn't expecting this. She played like she was alone in the world, yet connected to everyone in it. With every note, Deborah reclaimed something that had been taken from her, her voice, her dignity, her identity. By the time she struck the final chord, the room was completely silent. Then, applause, thunderous, genuine. Some diners stood, others wiped tears. Her coworkers cheered from the back. Leonard clapped too, but slowly, awkwardly, his expression unreadable. Deborah didn't care. She stood from the piano bench, chest rising with the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She looked around, and this time she didn't see customers. She saw witnesses, people who had seen her, and not one of them would ever forget her. Leonard sat quietly now, hands folded, stripped of every ounce of control he thought he had. He had set a trap, but she had turned it into a stage.
That night, Deborah went home with no tip from Leonard, but she didn't need one, because the next morning, her inbox held something far more valuable. The air was still thick with the echo of applause as Deborah stepped away from the piano. Her fingers tingled from the last chord, but her spirit felt lighter, liberated. Conversations had resumed across the dining room, but the energy had shifted. No longer just a waitress, she had become something else in the eyes of the patrons. A revelation. Back at Leonard's table, the once boisterous entourage had grown uncharacteristically quiet. Their laughter had evaporated, leaving only the clink of ice in crystal glasses and the awkward scrape of cutlery. Leonard adjusted in his seat. His smirk, the one he wore like armor, was gone. In its place, a mask of uneasy detachment. "Well," he said, louder than necessary, piercing the hush that still clung to the moment. "That was introspected." He let out a forced chuckle, dry and hollow. "I suppose talent really does come from the most surprising places." The compliment was meant to sound gracious. Instead, it landed with a dull thud. A few at his table glanced at one another, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. Deborah stood her ground. She tilted her head slightly, reading him like sheet music. He hadn't expected to be disarmed, and now, fumbling for control, his words rang empty. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady and cool. No warmth, but no malice either, just clarity. She wasn't about to let him pull her back into the smallness he had tried to define her by. Leonard cleared his throat, sensing the weight of the room's attention still hovering. He flagged down a waiter for another drink, a flimsy gesture meant to signal normalcy. But nothing was normal anymore. "You've got quite a gift," he added, the words nearly sticking in his throat. Deborah nodded once. "Everyone has a gift. It's how you choose to use it that matters." Her words carried no anger, but they struck with precision. Sharp, unapologetic. The silence stretched again, this time heavy with meaning. Diners turned back to their meals, but with a new energy, a kind of reverence. Where once there had been superiority and pretense, there was now quiet respect.
Leonard shifted in his seat. His dominance, so casually wielded earlier, had unraveled completely. He wasn't just humiliated, he was seen. As Deborah returned to her station, her coworkers greeted her with proud, knowing glances. Their smiles were quiet, but full. Something had changed, not just in the room, but in her. Her shoulders no longer slouched. Her steps felt different, rooted in something deeper than duty. Purpose. She refilled glasses, cleared plates, accepted the whispered compliments of patrons who now saw her clearly. "You were incredible," an elderly woman whispered as Deborah poured her coffee. "I haven't heard anything that beautiful in years." "Don't stop," another man said gently. "You've got something rare. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She nodded in gratitude, her voice caught somewhere between humility and joy. These weren't just kind words. They were affirmations, a quiet chorus validating all the years she had spent hidden in the background, all the music that had lived inside her with no stage to breathe on. Eventually, she returned to Leonard's table with the check. He looked up, his expression caught between sour pride and reluctant defeat. "You've made your point," he said, signing the bill with a flourish sharper than necessary. "No need to rub it in." Deborah paused, her eyes locking onto his. "It was never about proving anything to you," she said. Her voice was calm, measured, free. "I just wanted to play." Leonard had no answer, no smirk, no comeback, only silence. He looked down, suddenly interested in the condensation running down his glass. The once commanding figure had been reduced to a man out of place in his own spotlight. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone at the table knew it. As Leonard and his entourage rose from their table, their exit lacked its usual flair. No grand gestures, no performative farewells, just a quiet, hasty retreat into the night. Deborah watched them leave, not with triumph, not with bitterness, but with detachment. She wasn't thinking about Leonard anymore. Her mind was already somewhere else. Somewhere ahead. As she cleared the last table, a younger man from Leonard's group, softer, less polished than the others, lingered a moment. He looked at her genuinely. "You were amazing," he said, his voice sincere, almost reverent. The simplicity of his words caught her off guard. For a moment, Deborah saw something human in a group she had written off entirely. "Thank you," she replied, her smile small but real. Then she turned and walked away. Exterior, city street, night. The air was crisp as Deborah locked up and made her way home. For the first time in a long while, she felt something solid beneath the surface. Certainty. The tips from the night were unusually generous, enough to cover rent, and finally the piano lessons she'd put off for months. She wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just a dreamer. She was an artist. And nothing, no mockery, no silence, no paycheck, could take that away. Interior, Deborah's apartment later that night. She sat on the worn bench in front of her old upright piano. Its keys yellowed, its sound a little dull, but none of that mattered. The music flowed from her fingers the same way it always had, from her heart. That night at Les Fontaines hadn't just been a moment of victory. It had been a shift, a realization. Her talent didn't need to be justified. It didn't need permission. It simply was. Montage, days later. Word spreads. Patrons whisper her name. A clip of her performance circulates online. Something begins to stir. Then her phone rings. A music producer from Nashville. He was dining that night. No promises, no glamour, just an invitation. Come record a demo. Let's see where it goes. Deborah didn't say yes because she expected her life to change overnight. She said yes because something inside her had changed already. It wasn't about fame. It was about possibility. She'd spent years letting fear and self-doubt tell her she wasn't enough, that her dreams were unrealistic, too big, too far. Now she knew better. Leonard Grayson had simply been a mirror for every voice that had tried to diminish her, and she had silenced them all with the purity of her craft. Interior, apartment, night. She closed the lid of her piano gently and rested her hands on its faded wood. She smiled, softly, knowingly. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, it had truly begun. To camera, voiceover. What about you? What dream have you put on hold because of fear or doubt or someone like Leonard Grayson? Don't wait for the world to test you to prove you're worthy. Take your step forward now. If Deborah's story inspired you, subscribe for more stories of resilience, dignity, and quiet triumph. Because your story just might be next.